Watching what is happening in Gaza is familiar and depressing. It's a movie that we've unfortunately watched before. The question is, how will this latest round of violence end? Since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, there have been 3 wars with Israel, the last in 2014. The signals coming out of the Strip, both conscious and unconscious, have been for some time suggestive of another clash. On an overt level, Hamas has thrown its backing into protests at the border. Fence.It believes that they have been successful because it has put the issue of Gaza back on the agenda, but it is a tactic that cannot be continued indefinitely. Thousands of Palestinians have been injured and more than 100 killed by Israeli snipers. Locked in the devastating effects of Gaza's blockade, the group has as a result been criticized by some inside Gaza for recklessly inciting the people it governs to expose themselves to harm. Israel, though, can also not afford for the protests to continue. The Israel Defense Forces (IDF), the self-proclaimed most moral army in the world, has faced international criticism for its extensive reliance on live ammunition to stop mostly unarmed protesters from approaching or cutting the border fence. The status quo remains, though. The Israeli-led blockade continues, and the financial sanctions imposed by the Palestinian Authority are still in place. Although Egypt agreed to open the Rafah crossing for the month of Ramadan, Hamas is still isolated and economically desperate. It is perhaps facing a crisis of legitimacy. This is why we may see an escalation on the military front. Israel says the protests are being used as a camouflage for terror. On Sunday, it says its forces discovered an explosive device on the border fence. A Hamas position was targeted in response, and 3 members of Islamic Jihad were killed. Israel was braced for retaliation.And it came on Tuesday morning. The fact that so many mortars were fired and that some landed in a kindergarten ramps the tension up further, which is why Israel's latest response has been so strong. The risk then for this breaking into a full conflict is great, and the next few hours will be telling. However, there are strong indications that neither Israel nor Hamas wants a full-scale confrontation. Hamas knows if there's another war, Israel will likely not stop until the organization and all its terror infrastructure is destroyed. But for Israel to achieve such an outcome would involve having to send a land force into the Gaza Strip and then deal with the post-Hamas humanitarian fallout and the nightmare of a restive and hostile population of more than 2 million. None of this means, of course, that it won't happen. The underlying dynamic remains, even if this episode of violence passes as abruptly as it started.